Hi, my name is Shelly Burkhart, and I'm the Accessible Ohio Specialist for the Northwest region. I'm also a Certified Americans with Disabilities Act coordinator. Today's presentation is on website accessibility. Presenting alongside me today is my colleague Alanna. Would you like to introduce yourself and explain the accessibility features of today's webinar?
Sure. My name is Alanna Smith, and I serve as the Business Relations Specialist in the Northwest area of the state. So at OOD, we plan for accessibility from the start. For example, we use the accessibility checker that's built into Microsoft 365 to review the resource guide and PowerPoint. We address color contrast, font style and size, and add alternative text known as alt text to visual images. Also, in our delivery, we mention each other by name as the conversation goes back and forth to indicate who's speaking. This can be helpful when attendees are receiving this information through services like American Sign Language interpretation and live captioning. After the webinar, we edit the transcript and fix any captioning errors before uploading the webinar to our on-demand library. We also include a reasonable accommodation statement in our invitation to the webinar. So if attendees need an accommodation, they know who to ask to contact. And taking these steps up front can make this presentation more accessible and inclusive for everyone.
Thank you, Alanna. Today, we're your cake connoisseurs. We've heard people think of accessibility as an afterthought, the icing on the cake, so to speak, as if it's nice to have because let's face it, people like icing, but that the cake could stand on its own. It could exist without it. This may come from a common myth that you can't have a website which is visually appealing, looks modern, and is accessible. But websites are entirely about access. And without accessibility, not everyone has access or the same access. Today, we're here to share how it is possible to have both design and function.
That's right, Shelly. So you can have your cake and eat it too. We're putting our aprons on and we are ready to go.
Alanna, as with any culinary venture, success begins with a good recipe. This is also true when an organization wants to create a websites that are accessible and inclusive for all. Today we'll share our recipe with you, including these key ingredients: how to plan for accessibility, the principles of accessibility, the guidelines, the best practices for creating accessible websites, and we'll sprinkle in some helpful resources along the way. So let's get started with how to plan for accessibility.
Shelly, an accessible website is just as important as removing architectural barriers in a physical location. An accessible website is designed so everyone can access information effectively and equitably. It can improve general usability, increase traffic to your website, attract more customers, and lead to greater brand recognition and loyalty. Now, I have a few tips to help you plan your website with accessibility in mind, and these can include making accessibility a priority, knowing the guidelines, consulting with users, testing regularly, training the team, and staying current. So, Shelly, let's start with making accessibility a priority.
It's important to factor accessibility into your planning. If you don't, it's easy to put it on a back burner until key decisions or developments have already happened or until a barrier is communicated. Prioritizing accessibility from the start is often more efficient, more effective, and less costly than making an existing website accessible later. It also provides access from the beginning. So bake accessibility in from the start. There are ways to make accessibility a priority. You can be aware of the barriers individuals with disabilities encounter, cultivate a commitment to accessibility among your leadership, establish policies and procedures to support accessibility, create a budget and identify resources for accessibility, and consider accessibility at every step. This includes when purchasing new software or technology, when developing digital platforms and proprietary software, and when upgrading these items. Alanna, what's next?
Well, I'm glad you asked. It's time to get familiar with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and use these to plan, create, and maintain your website. These guidelines are the basis of your approach to an accessible website, and we'll talk more about these later. User consultation is another essential ingredient for creating an accessible website. And Shelly, can you discuss how to effectively gather this feedback?
Sure. One idea is to get user feedback when designing your website and then again at different stages of development. This may help identify barriers and ideas for creating access. Also, consider the abilities of all users, including the aging population, individuals with disabilities, and various learning styles. This will help improve website usability. Research assistive technologies and strategies people with disabilities use for online access. Then use this knowledge to develop effective solutions.
Shelly, when making a cake, it's important to check to ensure it's baked to perfection. And it's also important to test your website for accessibility regularly. Build time and resources for testing into your plan. Then test accessibility from the start and throughout development. Accessibility evaluation tools are a great starting point. Several no-cost tools are available, and we'll mention a few shortly. Include individuals with disabilities and other knowledgeable and diverse individuals in your user acceptance testing group. And once your website is live, ensure it stays accessible by regularly monitoring it, and build this task into your ongoing process. Another way to plan for accessibility is to develop staff knowledge and skills by providing education, training, and resources. And make this ongoing as technology changes frequently. This can build awareness of accessibility guidelines and principles, accessibility tools and methods, how to test for accessibility, how to document barriers, and how assistive technologies work with the website. It can be helpful to assign responsibilities and tasks for website accessibility so staff know who is responsible for what. And define these expectations and communicate them to staff. This, combined with training and resources, ensures that they have what they need to meet expectations. So, Shelly, once a website is accessible, do we need to continue to consider accessibility?
Absolutely. As technology is constantly evolving, it's important to stay current. Be aware of changes in guidelines, standards, and laws impacting website accessibility. This also includes updates to browsers, search engines, hardware upgrades, and assistive technology. For example, if the JAWS screen reader software has been updated, have a JAWS user verify your site is still accessible. Also, keep the authoring and web tools you use to build and maintain your website up to date.
Thanks for that insight, Shelly. So now that we have a plan for prioritizing accessibility, let's ask the audience a question about a recent website experience that they've had. So now, without mentioning specific names of companies and websites, who has an example to share of a website feature which made your search easier? And please drop your comment into the chat. But while we wait for comments, I have an example to share. When I was searching for a flower arrangement, my browser didn't load pictures, but thankfully there were alt text descriptions of the pictures for the item that I wanted to order. So I'll go to the chat here and see some responses. We have one from Jacqueline, search bar. Another one from Kevin, search bar. So search bar is helping making that a little bit easier. Rob said autocomplete. We have live chat option, filters, directory. Thank you all for those responses. And now, Shelly, now that we've discussed some of the positive online experiences related to accessibility, let's review the principles and guidelines for building an accessible website.
I agree. So that brings us to our core principles. The World Wide Web Consortium, known as W3C, defines 4 principles of accessibility, which include perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Taking the first letter of each principle gives us POUR for short.
Thanks, Shelly. To envision pour, we have an image of a person's hands pouring batter into a cake mold. Now think of these principles as the mold you will pour your cake into. Shelly, would you provide a summary of the first principle?
Sure. Perceivable means users must be able to get to the content free of barriers. To achieve this, information and user interface components must be presentable to users in ways they can perceive. In other words, it needs to be perceivable and recognizable to the user. This means presenting content in different ways for different modalities or senses without losing meaning. For example, when you're considering this, you might ask, if someone is blind or has low vision, can they use your site? Is the user experience positive regardless of how the user obtains the content? Alanna, will you tell us about the next principle?
Of course. The second principle is operable, and this means users must be able to use all aspects of the site without navigation barriers. And to achieve this, user interface components and navigation must be operable and usable by everyone. So this means there are no design limitations preventing someone from using your website. For example, when you're considering this, you might ask, if someone isn't using a mouse to browse your site, can they use it? And does your website work well with a keyboard, touch, and gestures?
Alanna, that brings us to our third principle, understandable, which means the user must be able to comprehend the information and understand the operation of the user interface. This means the navigation, content, and interactivity on your site are intuitive, predictable, and easy to use and digest. Example questions you may consider asking include, is the content of the site written for the 5th grade reading level? Does your site use plain language? Alanna, would you share the final principle?
Shelly, the fourth principle is robust, which means the content must be robust enough to be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of devices, including assistive technologies, and users must be able to browse the site with these various devices. It needs to have a responsive design, which means your site must be compatible with various tools, including desktop and mobile browsers, and assistive technologies such as screen readers, magnification, and voice recognition software. To help, there are some questions you might ask. If someone browses your website using voice commands, can they navigate in an efficient way? Is your site responsive in that it can adapt to various devices and screen sizes? For example, a computer and smart device. Those 4 principles, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, provide an effective foundation for building an accessible website. Okay, Shelly, before we move on, let's stop for some questions from the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, please enter it in the chat or raise your hand or your virtual hand. Now, we did receive a few pre-submitted questions that we'll start off with. Our first pre-submitted question is, what are best practices on websites for people who are deaf and use American Sign Language, also known as ASL, as their primary language?
Thanks for that question, Alanna. Today's webinar shares a broad awareness of a variety of best practices. Some of these can be beneficial to individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing, like providing captions, preparing transcripts, using plain language, and including ASL interpreting in videos. There are additional best practices such as creating and posting written information in ASL and considering tips for increasing the accessibility of an interpreter in the virtual environment. Elena, do we have another question?
Yes, thanks, Shelly. So our next question asks, how are we planning to comply with the updated Title II rule?
Elena, that's another great question. The state of Ohio website accessibility policy actually references the web content accessibility guidelines, the update to requirements, and a statement on how compliance is ensured. In addition to that, the ADA has also published a resource to assist state and local governments with complying with the ADA Title II Web and Mobile Application Accessibility Rule, and it includes action steps to help meet those responsibilities as well.
Okay, Shelly, and the last pre-submitted question we have for right now is, assume we know nothing about accessibility and help us understand what's most important and where to start.
Another great question. Thanks, Elena. The first we would recommend starting with planning for and prioritizing accessibility from the start. That's the first step. And because everyone is in a different place on their accessibility journey, we've actually created the priority tool and game plan, and this can be used to gain awareness of accessibility features and then establish and prioritize your accessibility goals. And hopefully that can be really helpful.
Thanks, Shelly. Now, it does look like we have a few responses or questions here in the chat. And the first question is, I'm not familiar with gestures used to navigate websites. Are there any examples?
There are different types of, generally, there are different types of modalities to interact with websites, and that could be one of those. For more information, or please contact us so we could have that discussion in further detail. So,
Thanks, Shelly. Another question that we have in the chat, what is the DAS policy number?
give me a second, I can find that.
Okay.
So the DAS policy number is policy number. It's Ohio's IT -09 website accessibility policy.
Thanks, Shelly. The next question we have here in the chat is, simple language is needed, but how can verbiage be simplified when there's a lot of legal verbiage references ORC?
Another great question. Thank you very much. And I appreciate the question there. We're going to be talking more about plain language as a best practice in the second part of this presentation, but that sounds like a very unique question, and so I would recommend reaching out to me after the webinar so we can talk more exactly how that would work better.
Thanks, Shelly, and thank you all. We'll stop again towards the end of the presentation to answer some more questions. So earlier we mentioned the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and these guidelines, also known as WCAG, WCAG, or WCAG, are like a recipe, and they set you up for success. But what you do, and how you do it will make the difference between baking a perfect cake or not. And Shelly, can you tell us more about WCAG?
Sure. WCAG is an international technical standard for web accessibility. It was developed by W3C in 1999 and has been updated over the years. WCAG has become the industry standard for website accessibility and evaluating digital accessibility. Compliance with WCAG is required by several laws and policies. WCAG is organized around the core accessibility principles we just discussed and includes guidelines, success criteria, and sufficient techniques and failures. The goal is to lay the groundwork for websites to be accessible to everyone. Together, these create your accessibility recipe. Specifically, The success criteria and the techniques outline how to follow your recipe. WCAG has 3 levels of compliance, just like a tiered cake.
Shelly, would you explain more about the levels of compliance for businesses aiming to align with a level when improving accessibility?
I'd love to. These represent increasing levels of accessibility and success criteria. The most basic is level single A. Think of this as the base layer of your cake, as it's a must-have. The second level of compliance is double A. This is the intermediate level and provides strong accessibility. Most laws target double A as it's the most applicable across the board. You could think of it like this. Your customers want a tiered cake, and they won't accept anything less than 2 tiers. And then the final level is triple A. This is the most advanced level and provides superior accessibility. Triple A is not typically required by law, as it may not be applicable for all organizations. W3C has a How to Meet WCAG quick reference guide to help you move beyond compliance and achieve the top tier. Think of this as your cookbook for creating an accessible website. Alanna, this would be a great time to sort of shift our focus to some accessibility best practices.
I agree. And now that we have our WCAG recipe, we have 7 accessibility best practices to share. Okay, I bet now everyone's ready to dive into some cake, right? Perfect. So let's roll up our sleeves and learn how we bring our best practices to life. For this discussion, we'll be demonstrating the website of our fictitious bakery, Cakeability. And Cakeability is a top-tier bakery selling everything from cupcakes to donuts, both online and in stores. And this is their homepage, showing the header, navigation, and the hero banner. So let's scroll through the homepage for a quick look. This section of the Cakeability homepage shows 8 featured cupcakes from the shop. It also shows the Cake Stars team and testimonials. The bottom of the Cakeability homepage displays Instagram highlights and the footer of the page. Shelly, I think we're ready for our first accessibility best practice, which is how to use color effectively.
So, Alanna, the first question is, why does accessible color matter? Insufficient contrast between the web copy and the background makes it difficult or impossible to read for many users. A good color palette makes your website easier to read and more visually appealing. Let's discuss some ways to make color accessible. When considering your website's color palette, use proper color contrast. To do this, make sure there is sufficient contrast between the background of the page and the text. Use tools like Accessible Color Palette Builder to create your color scheme and WebAIM's Contrast Checker to verify color combinations. It's important to avoid relying on color alone to convey information. Users with a vision disability may have a limitation with perceiving content if color is the sole indicator of differences. Instead, use visual attributes such as shapes, icons, text, contrast, and spacing to convey information. And then make links, buttons, and placeholder text easily identifiable without relying solely on color. And avoid making users hover over elements to understand their purpose. Now, this best practice enhances readability and navigation. It helps with reading content on low-resolution screens. It addresses challenges related to situational factors like bright sunlight or dimly lit environments, and it ensures usability for all users.
And Shelly, to represent proper color contrast, this slide shows a cake with multiple tiers in bright rainbow colors. Now let's discuss how the colors of the Cakeability logo were used to design the website. So here's the Cakeability logo. It's a 3-tiered cake with a star on top, surrounded by a laurel wreath with a banner at the bottom with the company name. And we wanted to make sure the title Cakeability in the logo used proper color contrast. Shelly, can you talk more about contrast and how the color was determined?
I'd be happy to. Color contrast is a ratio of the luminance, or the amount of light of the foreground color to the background color. The highest contrast you can get is black on white. The lowest contrast is the same color on itself, which has no contrast at all. To pick the color for the title, we tested colors from the logo using WebAIM's contrast checker, which is pictured on this slide. We analyzed the contrast of white against cadmium orange, a color from our logo. The result is a fail, which means this combination does not provide enough contrast. Next, we analyzed the contrast of white against lotus red, another color from our logo. According to the contrast checker, this color combination is a pass, which means it provides proper contrast. So lotus red was selected to be the color of the title, Cakeability, in the logo.
That's right, Shelly, because the color combination provides proper color contrast. We also chose a lotus red color with the white text as our navigation colors for the Cakeability website, with big stone gray as a highlight. This color palette provides proper contrast, matches our brand colors, and looks appealing. Now, let's discuss color redundancy, which means using other visual attributes in addition to color to relay information. This slide shows the wish list page using only color to indicate the active navigation item. The shop navigation item is identified in gray.
Alanna, users with color vision deficiency may not see the color change to identify which item is active. Without color, though, it may be impossible to tell which item is active. This slide shows the same wish list slide in grayscale, making it impossible to identify that active navigation item. So how could we improve this?
Shelly, adding a star icon and line provides color redundancy, so color alone is not the only way to distinguish the active item. Notice the star next to and the line beneath shop to identify the active navigation item on the slide. And Shelly, the second best practice is to include alternative text known as alt text. This is a text representation of visual content, which enables users to receive the content of the images in a non-visual way. But why does alt text matter?
Alanna, alt text is accessed by individuals using screen readers to receive the meaningful content of visual information. This can be helpful to people with visual disabilities, sensory processing disorders, or learning disorders. So let's discuss some best practices. Be concise. Describe the image's purpose without including unnecessary details. Focus on context. Alt text describes the information or function represented by the visual. Consider the image's role within the content and lead with the most crucial details. Avoid redundancy. Avoid repeating information already present in surrounding text. Now, this best practice contributes to better search engine optimization, or SEO. SEO includes the strategies used to increase the number of people who visit the website. It also ensures everyone perceives the content of a web page, regardless of visual ability.
Shelly, I don't know about you, but my stomach is growling. So let's offer a sample to consider.
Alanna, the Cakeability product page on the slide includes informative product images which convey specific concepts or information. The alt text should describe the essential content. Now, to determine if an image is informative, remove it from the design. If this results in a loss of information, it requires alt text. In the case of a product image, communicate the key product information. Consider potential buyer questions and include alt text which answers those questions like the product image does. For example, the alt text for the picture of the Mississippi Mud cupcake may be Mississippi Mud, a chocolate cupcake with piped vanilla icing, raspberries, raspberry sugar, and mint on top.
All right, Shelly, let's check in with the audience for a quick poll. And the poll is, are there occasions when alt text is not needed? And the selections are yes or no. Okay, I see those answers coming in pretty quickly here. And it looks like there's not even a tie. Well, maybe as more are answering, yeses and nos are coming in, but it looks like we're at a steady pace of majority is saying yes. So
And
the answer.
The majority is correct in this case. Images can be marked decorative when they do not convey essential content and information. This may occur when images are used primarily for visual decoration. Remember, when considering whether alt text is needed for an image, a trick is to remove the images to determine if the surrounding text conveys the meaningful information. If it doesn't, mark the image as decorative.
And Shelly, thanks for that information on alt text. That brings us to our third best practice, using descriptive hyperlinks, also called links. So why do descriptive links matter?
Alanna, these inform users where a link will take them, benefiting those who use screen readers or voice recognition. They also provide context, making it easier to navigate and comprehend the purpose of the link. Screen reader users frequently use keyboard shortcuts to generate a list of all links on a page, enhancing their navigation efficiency. Non-descriptive links like "click here" can confuse users, so using meaningful link text is a best practice for web design. It's important to use clear, concise language for embedded links. Descriptive links should make sense when read in the context of the information on the page and also independently. They should clearly indicate their destination or action when followed. And instead of a link saying, "click here to browse our selection of cupcakes," it can be shortened to "browse our cupcakes" without losing meaning. Also, avoid vague or generic terms. For instance, avoid links like "click here" or "learn more."
Shelly, another important best practice when embedding links is to provide consistent link text. Ensure all links leading to the same destination use identical link text. The consistency helps users understand how to navigate your site. And also include link descriptions rather than URLs as link text. And try not to make the link the URL or web address unless it's something short like cakeability.com, because URL links can be difficult to read. Links including clickable images should always have descriptions which can be read aloud by screen readers and other assistive technologies. And this best practice provides clarity by presenting clear context about where the link leads. It improves efficiency for everyone. It offers consistency, helping all users know what to expect when encountering similar links. And good descriptive links improve SEO. Search engines use link text to understand page content and rank it appropriately. Shelly, do you have an example to share?
I do. The slide shows two cupcake images with their names written. The Lush Velvet Cupcake shows the price per dozen. The Mississippi Mud Cupcake shows the text "Add to Cart." To make this accessible, the link text to add an item to the cart should indicate what is being added. In this case, the link text should read, "Add Mississippi Mud Cupcake to cart." Add to cart links should not be shown on rollover or hover. They should always be present. Alanna, let's smooth out the icing by sharing the next best practice.
Sure. So this is to use a structure with proper headings. Headings are signposts guiding users through the information on your website. And why do headings matter?
Alanna, properly formatted and coded headings provide content structure, making it easier for all visitors to read and understand each page. Headings also permit those using screen reading technology to skim the page as someone might do visually. When you're designing your web page and its headings, use a simple, logical structure. Before building, plan your heading structure to ensure you maintain the correct hierarchy and avoid skipping heading ranks. Make sure headings provide an outline of the page demonstrating the overall structure of the content. And use headings to chunk your content to make it easier for all users to scan and understand. Also, don't skip heading levels or leave them empty because screen readers will still read these aloud, potentially causing confusion.
Shelly, what are the benefits of a structure with proper headings?
Well, these can give users a positive first impression. Your website's main page heading is often the first thing visitors notice. They also provide a clear structure for text, breaking it into smaller sections. This helps both users and search engines navigate and interpret the content. And it also helps analyze headings and subheadings to determine a page's relevance. Properly formatted headings contribute to better SEO.
Shelly, on this slide is a piping bag blog post from Cakeability. And note the heading structure and chunking. The larger headings referred to as H1 are choosing the right piping bag and preparing the piping bag. There are subheadings referred to as H2 under preparing the piping bag, which are 3 steps identified to prepare the piping bag. The relevant information for each topic is located under the corresponding heading and shows how the headings help chunk the information by topics. When the information is chunked, users can find the information more efficiently. The 5th best practice is providing captions for audio and video content. Captions provide a text version of a video's dialogue, music, and sound effects. Shelly, would you explain why captions matter?
Of course, captions can make video content more accessible to individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing, ensuring everyone can enjoy and understand the content. They can benefit individuals with a sensitivity to sound, a limitation with following complex conversations, or a difficulty remembering what they just heard. Also, some users may use captions because they are in a loud environment where they can't hear, or in a quiet environment where they don't want audio on.
Shelly, what are some best practices when creating captions?
It's important to ensure the accuracy of captions. These must be error-free while accurately reflecting spoken content. It's also best to verify the captions generated from artificial intelligence, or AI, are corrected before posting a recorded version or an archive of audio content. When providing captions, preserve the meaning and intent of what is being captioned to provide equal access to the information. This includes representing tone, volume, and relevant accents to accurately reflect what is spoken. Remember to make captions easy to read. Include appropriate timing and synchronization with the audio. They should be displayed long enough to be read comfortably, and captions should use a uniform style, readable fonts, and proper contrast. Alanna, what are the benefits of providing captions?
Well, captions assist viewers who may have a limitation with accents, fast speech, or background noise by providing clear textual representation of the audio. They help when preparing transcripts to share content of audio materials, such as webinars, podcasts, and lectures. And they're a valuable tool for people learning a new language and helping them follow along with spoken dialogue. And adding captions can improve a video's SEO, making it easier for people to find the content online.
Alanna, in addition to captions, adding audio descriptions helps provide brief audio explanations of key visual content and actions in videos. Audio descriptions are like alt text. They provide the meaningful visual content in a spoken, audible format. These can be described by your subjects, added in the original audio, such as between dialogue or scenes, or edit it into a separate video.
Shelly, let's watch how this all comes together in the Cakeability promo video.
Rich. A thick cheesecake rotates on a platter. Sweet. Coconut sprinkles are added to a small round cake with red icing. Heavenly. A marshmallow icing is added to a cake with a spoon. Chocolatey. A half-sphere chocolate cake rotates to show a meringue topping. Delectable. Pink icing is piped around a fancy cake. Does your cake rise to the occasion? Ours does. Pink icing is piped in small dabs on top of the cake in slow motion. Cakeability. A tier above. The Cakeability logo, a tiered cake with a laurel wreath and a star on top, appears on screen.
Okay, everyone. So what are some things which stood out to you in the video? And feel free to put your answers in the chat. I see somebody's having cake for lunch. So everybody's talking about cake now. But one of the things that stood out to someone is audio description. The description was concise and clear. I like how they described the logo at the end. Description detailed, active description smooth, a descriptive audio, the audio description indicating the narrator and the descriptions. All right, thank you guys for participating. Oh, one more came in. I could look away and totally get an understanding of the video, very detailed.
Well, Alanna, those were all great suggestions, weren't they? And they're right. It makes us think it's time for cake. But we're going to go on with the presentation today. This is so we're going to move on to our sixth best practice. And that best practice is using plain language, which means we're talking about using direct, understandable language, and it's intended to communicate information as clearly as possible.
And why does plain language matter, Shelly?
Well, it's critical for web content accessibility, and it communicates information clearly to everyone, including individuals with various literacy levels and learning disabilities, as well as non-English speakers. There are best practices to using plain language, and it starts with keep it simple. Prioritize straightforward language and avoid unnecessary details and complexity. Next, avoid jargon and complex metaphors. Refrain from using industry-specific jargon, flowery adjectives, and intricate metaphors. And then prioritize clarity and consistency. Ensure your text remains clear, concise, consistent, and well-organized. Use short sentences with one idea per sentence, and consider starting paragraphs with key takeaways or objectives. Use bullets or numbered lists when appropriate. And there are some benefits for using plain language. These include providing a better understanding. Plain language helps users find, interpret, and use information effectively, which benefits everyone. And it helps reduce misunderstanding information.
Shelly, another benefit is related to skimming and scanning. People often scan web pages focusing on headings and the first few words of sentences. On average, users read only about 18% of what's on a page, and plain language can help make your website's information and message clear. So let's go through a demonstration to help us better understand plain language. Now, on this slide is a screenshot of Cakeability's product details webpage, and it has an image of a Mississippi mud cake pictured on the left. And to the right, it has the cupcake name, purchase price, and description. So let's zoom in. And this slide shows a zoomed in version of the cupcake picture and description. And the description reads, envision a sumptuously moist chocolate foundation intricately adorned with luxuriously smooth vanilla frosting that seamlessly melts upon the tongue, offering an exquisite symphony of flavors that tantalize the senses. Whew, that description is complex and flowery. Shelly, how can this be adjusted to use plain language?
Well, Alanna, tools such as AI, the Hemingway editor, Grammarly, or even Microsoft Word with the additional grammar settings turned for clarity turned on can help you rewrite the text to improve readability. This slide shows the updated text. Let's read it. Picture a moist chocolate base crowned with velvety vanilla icing that melts in your mouth. I think we can agree the update improves readability. Just remember, when using these tools to review the suggested text, to always review the suggested text they offer. Alanna, will you share our final best practice, designing the site for keyboard navigation?
Sure. This means users can navigate your website by using their keyboard instead of a pointer, like a mouse or a touchpad.
Alanna, and why does keyboard accessibility matter?
Shelly, this benefits individuals with limitations using a mouse and individuals who use the tab key to navigate web pages and interactive elements. So let's discuss some best practices. Ensure interactive elements are reachable and usable, and make sure your website can be navigated without using a mouse. And make sure forms on your website can be navigated using only the keyboard too. And as a bonus, consider designing the website to interact with other input methods, including touch and voice. Add skip links. Include links on your website to skip the main content of the page. These enable users to jump directly to the main content, bypassing repetitive navigation menus and site text. This best practice helps to define a logical order to the visual information presented, which can prevent confusion. It also ensures users can still interact with your website if their mice or touchpads malfunction.
Alanna, do you have an example to help us better understand this best practice?
Shelly, after talking about these best practices, our audience may be wondering, can they just use an overlay?
Let's talk about that. Overlays are software tools which attempt to automatically fix website accessibility issues in real time. The picture on the slide is a popular accessibility failure meme showing a very steep wheelchair ramp overlaid directly on top of stairs with no additional railing. Some say this is the buckle up ramp, but I call it our cake delivery system. We added a cake at the top of the ramp and we're going to deliver it to the woman at the bottom. How well do you think this is going to go? It's a good analogy to help us understand an overlay solves the symptoms of the problem, but not the problem itself. Instead, integrating accessibility in all stages of design and development is the key to success. Alanna, let's stop one last time for questions.
All right, if you'd like to ask a question, please enter it in the chat or raise your virtual hand. We do have a few more pre-submitted questions, and I'll go ahead and read those first. Okay, Shelly, this pre-submitted question asks, can you go into a little detail about hosting training material online? For example, explainer videos, job aids, etc.
Well, thank you for that question, Alanna. Some of today's content may be helpful to answer this question, like our tips for color contrast, plain language, and using alt text. Also, we included some best practices for creating accessible documents in last month's webinar on accessible communications. You could also consider including an accessibility statement on your website to provide information on the site's accessibility and include contact information to users so users know who to reach out to if they do encounter barriers.
Okay, and the next question we have submitted, how do you ensure older PDFs loaded to your site are accessible? Are there resources available for someone to review your site accessibility to help you find issues?
Thank you, Alanna. Another great question. Now, for older PDFs, Adobe recommends using their built-in accessibility tool. This is not error-proof, so you'll want to manually test this also. Through our consultations with us, we could also talk with you about resources that may be helpful for your own unique goals.
Thanks, Shelly. And our final pre-submitted question that we have, are there any tools or resources available to help developers test for accessibility issues?
There are, Alanna, thank you. There are two ways to test, automated and manually. Automated testing tools assist with determining whether web content meets accessibility guidelines, but may not catch every barrier. So it's important to also test web content manually for accessibility. We have some tools listed in our resource guide that was dropped in the chat at the beginning of the presentation.
Thanks, Shelly. And we do have some questions here in the chat, trying to scroll up a bit so I don't miss any. It looks like our first question, how do we use plain language to convey something that needs to be highly scientific and or complicated, like Ohio's geology's new aquifer yield and hydraulic conductivity maps?
It sounds like it's a mouthful, Alanna. Another great question, thank you. There are best practices related to plain language, and we talk about them in our resources on our website and webinars, this webinar, last month webinar, and in different consultations. Some of these best practices, you've already highlighted sort of the concerns with like that industry specific jargon and stuff. But what I would recommend is reaching out to your Accessible Ohio specialist to consult with them on the best practices to meet your organization's goals so that we can make sure we answer everything clearly and as well as we can.
Okay, and then the next question, when will the entirety of this video be available on demand?
Another great question, Alanna. It sometimes takes a little bit because, as we mentioned at the beginning, we always check the captioning to make sure it's accurate before we archive that, but we will be sending out an email when it's ready.
All right, and then I think the next question I have here is, would the auto-generated captions for this presentation meet accessibility standards for a live event, or is an ASL interpreter required to meet requirements?
It's a very good question. We actually have both captioning and American Sign Language interpretation going on for our presentation. The best practice, like I said, we actually check it before we do archive it. But if you would like more definite information, please reach out to us about how we can meet your, how you can meet the needs that you're looking for.
Thanks, Shelly. The next question we have is the use of AI for converting text into plain language permissible? I'm unsure about the policy.
I'm sorry, Elena, can you repeat that? I apologize.
Yes. This next question is the use of AI for converting text into plain language permissible? I'm unsure about the policy.
Well, another great question. Thank you. I guess I would, first of all, I'm not sure what policy you might be referring to. Your own organization may have policies about this, but we would recommend, best practice would be always to review any language that is created through AI before you share that information. So.
Thanks. And then we have some people requesting a whole course on plain language, and some other people in the chat actually finding some links and resources. So thank you for those resources that you're dropping in the chat to help everyone out. Thank you for that. The next question we have is, when asking people to register or sign up for an event, what should the link text say instead of register here?
Once again, Elena, thank you for the question. This is Shelly. When you're talking about those, when you're thinking through the link text, you may want to link it to the event so somebody knows exactly what event you're asking them to register to. Except the OOD website accessibility webinar registration or something like that. Like if you're using today, something that would give people an idea of exactly what they were. Because like we said, sometimes people look at that information independently. And so it's important that it's identifiable both in context and independently.
Thanks, Shelly. And to respect everyone's time, we're going to conclude today's webinar. We will stay a few minutes after the presentation to address questions that we didn't have time to answer. So if you need to leave, there's no worries. This portion of today's session will be archived with the rest of the presentation, and we'll post a recording on the employer page of the OOD website along with other webinars in our on-demand library. So for any of the best practices and resources that we've shared, or for more information or more in-depth information, the AL specialists are available to consult with you about your unique goals and customized resources to help you create more inclusive environments.
Thanks, Elena. To conclude, let's return to the recipe for success. For website accessibility, an accessible website accessibility. An accessible website means everyone can use the web-based services and access information effectively and equitably. The recipe includes planning for accessibility, the core principles of accessibility, WCAG, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which sets you up for success, and some best practices to consider when creating the website, as well as some various website accessibility resources. As a reminder, this webinar is not exhaustive list of ideas, best practices, and tips. We do hope this information, though, has been helpful. If you would like additional information, please reach out. We are available and happy to continue the conversation.